Are educators burning out faster than schools can replace them? Is the system asking too much of teachers and giving too little back? And what does running nearly 3,000 consecutive days have to do with showing up for yourself and your students? All this and more on today's episode of The Underlayer, show where we go beneath the surface to find out what's really driving behavior. I'm David Young, your host. I work with coaches and consultants to help their businesses run leaner, earn more, and take less of their time. And today I'm joined by Sarah Fillion, an educational consultant, coach, and keynote speaker with over 20 years of experience in public education. She's presented in 27 states and 11 countries, designed more than 30 courses, and has made educator well-being a centerpiece of her work. We're going to talk about the current state of education heading into this new school year, what teachers are telling her right now, what school leaders can do differently, and what running every single day for almost a decade has taught her about resilience and leadership. Sarah, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
So much for having me.
So yeah, I was just saying before we started, the timing of this was perfect because school started this week. So my wife teaches at a local high school. My oldest son's a junior there. My youngest son is in seventh grade. He'll go there in a couple years. So she went back on Monday, 2 teacher days, and then the kids started on Wednesday. And the big deal here is that over the summer, Indiana passed a law banning all devices. So no phones, no smartwatches, no earbuds, nothing from the time the bell rings, which is about 8:30 at the high school until school is out 3:15. So not in the passing periods, no hallways, no study hall, not at lunch. Like the devices are done for like 7 straight hours. And so I think most of especially the high school kids, which are plugged in all the time, I think they're going through serious withdrawal here on day three. I'm just curious if have you seen that in other states, and what your kind of take on that is, because it was kind of a shock to the system here.
Yeah, that's something that is happening pretty much across the country. I feel like more and more schools and districts are adopting this policy. And what they're finding is that, just like what you said, there's this initial, like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Like kids during lunch are kind of looking at each other, being like, where do we look? Like, what do we do? How do we communicate? But what the magic that I have read about and that I've seen in different schools is that there comes this sweet point after about a month. And then all of a sudden, kids start engaging more with one another. They start engaging more in class. And a couple of factors that I've read about that really lead to success are what exactly is the policy? So for your son and your wife, I guess, at the high school, is it that it just can't be seen, or do they have to drop them off somewhere?
To my knowledge, they have to be completely out of sight. So it has to be in their backpack and supposed to be off, or in their locker. So it can't even be out. Even if it's off, they're supposed to be invisible, basically.
Yeah, so that's like one level. And then other districts have seen a lot of success by saying, like, you have to put them in a pouch, like in
Mm.
a locked, like in the office or whatever. And so I think that there's a lot of variation. I think that the key piece becomes, how do we make sure that teachers are being given strategies, because we need to make sure that we're helping students learn now how to engage. Because even as you said, like your 14-year-old son, like, this is something, he's been locked into this device, and like you said, he's having like this withdrawal, almost, and it becomes this, how do we then help students to re-engage both during class and during free periods, instead of just trying to go to their lockers and smuggle their phones, or like send a quick text or whatever. I think that becomes the key piece of how do we support, and there's a ton of ways, like there's a lot of different ways that engagement can happen. But throughout most of the states, New Hampshire adopted that. Last year was their first full year. I know a lot of the other states right around in the New England area have all adopted that. And what they've really seen is that there has been an uptick in engagement, fewer behavior issues, not saying that it's eliminated it, but definitely fewer behavior issues, and just higher engagement during classrooms as well.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's good to hear that it's been positive. I was surprised to hear, we were talking about it last night after day two. My wife was talking to one of the administrators. So it's a zero tolerance policy. They're not giving kids even like one warning. So if you get caught with it, the immediate first punishment is a 2-hour detention, and then you lose the phone. I think the second one is still detention, but your parents have to come pick up the phone, and then it kind of escalates. But through 2 days, and it's a pretty big school, there's 3,000 kids, 3,200 kids, a pretty good size high school. Only 25 write-ups in the first 2 days, which I would definitely have taken the over. uh, on that prior to school starting. So it seems like they've pretty quickly adopted. My son was funny. He had study hall on day one, because they I don't know how they do it there, but so they split the days. So they call it like block scheduling. So you do like
Yeah.
half, yeah. So but the first day they did all the classes, shortened class periods, just so they could meet all the teachers. Anyway, so we had study hall, but it was only for maybe 40 minutes. And he was like, I didn't have anything to do. I was just sitting there. I was like, yeah, welcome to most people my age and close to my age our entire lives. Like, yeah, you couldn't plug in. There wasn't something in your hand that told you everything.
Yeah.
And he was like, I didn't have anything to do. I was like, you should have gotten your notebook out and started sketching like golf holes. You should design a golf course. And he was like, what? I was like, just start outlining a hole, like create one hole and just draw it, draw the bunkers, draw the fairway, outline a green. He was like, no. I was like, I'm just trying to give you ideas. Like, it's probably not gonna be the first time you're sitting there with nothing to do. And if you can't be on a device or a screen, you're gonna have to figure it out. You're just gonna stare at the wall for an hour.
Yeah.
So, but it's funny, like they really haven't had that downtime, the boredom, the time to allow your mind to just kind of bro
And that's
roam
becoming
and
like
think.
that's becoming like a new trend is um especially with I guess it would be Gen Zers. It's like the 20-ish year olds now, 20 to 30 probably. They're now, from what I've seen and read, is that they're now creating intentional boredom moments where they'll set a timer for 15 minutes and they literally will just have a chair that's facing a wall and they're like, all technology is off. I'm literally just sitting here and like letting my mind both decompress and trying to allow it to get to a more creative space as well. And I, of course, like you, I'm like, oh, or we could just call that my entire childhood, like when it was rainy and you weren't allowed to go outside and play or, like whatever it was. And you're like, I'm bored. And my parents were like, go stare at the wall. Like you'll figure something out to do.
Yeah, you would end up playing games, board games, or
Yeah.
I had like,
Inventing games. Think of how many
yeah,
games we invented. Like,
toys. I had like Star Wars type figures or action figures. You'd play with those, or I would go play basketball or something. But and we did watch TV, and we eventually had Nintendo. But like for us, video games, at least the way it went with us is we always did that way after the fact. Like we played like all day, and then
yeah,
we would play like Nintendo like at night. But we would never start our day. Like my kids start their day on the Xbox,
yeah.
usually on a weekend, right?
Hmm.
They get up and
Hmm.
they just start playing Fortnite or NBA or whatever they're playing with their friends, and they're all friends are on. So it's not like they're just playing with themselves or the computer. They're playing games with friends, but it just starts plugged in. And
Yes.
that we didn't do that. Like when I got up on a Saturday morning, like I would go outside.
Yeah.
I would eat breakfast and I'd be outside, and a lot of times I'd be outside like most of the day. And so that's the difference, is that it's like been flipped. So now it's like
Yeah.
more screen time and they occasionally go outside, whereas we were always outside and then we had occasional video game time. Maybe that's just an evolution of time, but
Yeah. And
that's the big difference.
I think it is. I think the pendulum is starting to swing back, and it'll be interesting to see, which I feel like is so characteristic of education in particular, which I think is a microcosm for all of society as well, where the pendulum swings from one way and then it swings all the way through to the other extreme. And I'm like, what if we stopped it in the middle? Like what if we found like a happy middle point instead of being like, we're going from all technology, we don't have to go all the way to no technology. Like let's bring it somewhere in the middle. And I think that that's something that has, like, I've seen not only with the students but also with the teachers, of because they're so locked in, because your cell phone has so many different capabilities. I mean, when like I started teaching in 2003, and I remember even in my second job, which I didn't start until 2008 as a teacher, just like a different school. But I remember I had a cell phone, but it wasn't like, it was still 2008. So smartphones weren't even out there yet. And I remember my husband was home and our water heater failed. And the only way that he could get a hold of me, because my cell phone was off during the day, so the only way he could get a hold of me was to call the school, talk to the secretary, have them page him through to my classroom. Whereas now something like that happens, and like you're just getting texts, and like you said, like it's coming in on your watch, it's coming in on your phone. Like if you have an earbud in, like it's making announcements, it's doing all of this. And I feel like that's also is also compounded the issue even with teachers in school of making school feel like there's never any disconnection from anything. We're always so connected to everything. So teachers can't go in and just be like, I'm teaching for the day, because they're doing that, but they're getting notifications about, don't forget this doctor's appointment is coming up, or, anything from daycare is messaging you to pet care is messaging you to your dry cleaner is messaging you to be like, hey, this is coming, or FedEx is telling you, like this is on its way. And so there's no detachment ever. And I feel like that is, again, it's not just for students, but I also see it even with adults, because we're so connected, and people can get a hold of us at all times. It's just like your system never gets a chance to take a breath because you're always on.
Yeah, it's like sleeping in the shower or, like running. I don't run with any. I mean, I do have a GPS watch, but that's just to track. I don't get any notifications on it. It just tells me mostly how far I've gone. But I used to run with like earbuds and listen to music, and then I was like, I don't really enjoy that. It's nice to be out and hear the sounds of being out. And plus, like you said, we're always so connected. I was like, I'm only going to run for probably 30 or 40 minutes. Like, it's not going to be a long time. Like, I don't need my phone and earbuds on this effort. And I've been doing that for several years now, and it's like I love it. Because the intentional breaks is interesting for the younger generation. I've seen people talk about more creatives. I think it was Tarantino, when he was writing Pulp Fiction. It was either before he wrote it or as he was writing it, but he would go out like in his pool for like half an hour every day, just and like lay in the pool
Mm,
and just surrounded by nothing. And he was like, that was kind of like, that's when he got most of his ideas, and just in the water, and it's calm, and like whatever's around. And then just it just allows your brain to just calm down. It's not on alert. And then that's when, because you're probably the same way. Like, I get a lot of my ideas like running, like cutting the
mhm,
grass, where you're
mhm.
just like not
Yeah,
the hum of the mower, but I'm not thinking about anything. Or in the shower, you're not plugged in, and it just even and none of those are really long endeavors. But even in a short period of time, once your brain is starts to relax and is like it's not on anything, listening for anything, then that's when you typically get creative, right? You're like, oh, I think
yeah,
about this, or I could do it this way, or what about this? But it's hard to do that when you're constantly Slack and email and LinkedIn and
yeah.
DMs and like
And
all the stuff.
even the examples that you gave, you still have to intentionally make that choice of, I'm not going to be plugged in during that time. Like you said, so many people run with earbuds, run with their phones. Everyone that I know, that I say that I've run as many days as I have, people are just like, you don't run with a phone? And I'm like, no, I tell my husband what route I'm coming. He knows if I'm not back in 2 hours, he should probably get concerned. And if I'm not back by 3 hours, he should get concerned. But that's about it. And they're like, what happens if something happens? And I'm like, what's going to happen? Like I'm going to be okay. And even with sleep, like think of the number of people who fall asleep with TVs on, or different things like that. So you still have to intentionally carve out the time of being like, I'm not going to be on a device at this point. I'm going to let my nervous system, my brain, everything just be present, take a breath, and relax and go from there. And I think that that is an intentional thing. And I think that that really goes to a lot of the movement around schools saying, let's help kids disconnect and being able to even just adjust their focus instead of it being everywhere. Let's try to narrow it down on, there still is plenty of stimulation at a school throughout the day, that you don't need to have your cell phone there. But I think that that can also help even with expanding attention timeframes, because those have been decreasing over time. And now maybe we can get a little bit longer sustainment. I'm not saying that we're going to get up to like an hour per person, like of being able to sustain focus, but I think that that's part of what's driving this as well.
Yeah, and you getting back to what you're talking about, like at lunch, like at the school lunches, and everybody just used to being on their devices, and then like where do you look and how do you talk? And my wife has seen it. She's taught high school for her entire career, but especially as the years have gone by, and like kids really lack social skills. Like they struggle to have conversations, put sentences together, respond back to what someone's saying, and have a true back and forth dialogue. It's because it's not something they've really had to do,
Hmm.
especially with people they don't know. So whether it's a new student or they get paired up in class, or they have to go talk to a teacher about a grade or something, like they struggle because they just simply,
Yeah.
and we've always made our kids order for themselves at restaurants, and really try to use their voice as much as we could growing up as they've gotten older, because like at some point, regardless of how connected we are, like you have to be able to speak. You have to articulate a position, whether it's a job interview or a team project or a school project or what. It doesn't matter. There's just still whether, and it could be like this virtually. It doesn't. The medium might change, but you still have to be able to speak clearly and coherently and understand what people are saying back to you and be able to talk back. And like that's still a skill that we took for granted because we had to do it. We didn't have any other way to communicate. And now it's so easy to send a text or a DM or Slack message.
Yes.
You don't train that ability. So I think that I hadn't thought about that as much with just the overall like withdrawal with not being connected, but I think it will, or it'll have to force them to speak, use words.
Yes. And I think there's also another element of the having the awkward moment. I'm sure that you can remember this of you wanted to talk to one of your friends. And so you called, but then the dad answered or the mom answered. And all of a sudden, I can remember for myself just having this awkward moment of being like, oh, hi, Mrs. So and so. Is my friend Kelly there? Right. And so you had to, and then of course, some of the moms or dads would be like, oh, like, what's going on? Like, or I watched you in your basketball game last night. And then I can remember like having this moment of almost sweating of being like, what do I do? But we practiced that so much. And so then you almost started to anticipate of, like, oh, I know that this person has chatty parents. And so, but you got used to that. And I think that that's the other part that is a skill that is really hard to teach children unless you give them some exposure to that. So like you were saying, like ordering in a restaurant, like you plan out what you're going to order and then the waiter asks you something else that you're not expecting. You're like, how well done do you want your hamburger cooked? Or do you want a salad or fries with that? And if you haven't rehearsed, there's this moment of anxiety that is real. And we have to learn, children and all humans have to learn, how do we sit through that and how do we breathe into it, and then how do we continue to communicate in an effective way to either be like, oh, I'm sorry, can you repeat that question, or give an answer. But I think that's the other part, is that that's why the lunches can feel so awkward right now, is that no one's willing to take the risk because it feels so awkward, and so they're like, I'm going to let somebody else initiate the conversation or whatever.
Yeah, that's very true. I remember that telling that story. We were out to eat. This is maybe a year ago. And my dad, he's not the most social person you'd ever meet. And he has a low voice and he doesn't speak up. So I'm used to it. My wife says he speaks like a different language. She's like, I think you're the only one that understands what he's saying. But we were at a restaurant and it was loud, and he just doesn't speak loudly. And it's hard for servers to hear him, especially if he's not like right next to him. So he was kind of in the middle. And so he was trying to order and she just couldn't hear him. And my youngest son, who was 12 at the time, or actually he was 11 at the time, he spoke up for him. He like knew what he wanted. And so he just was like, oh, he's trying to order this. And he said it like loudly and clearly. And then the server was like, oh, okay. And it's because we had taught him for all these years, like, not only do you have to speak, but at a restaurant like this that is loud, you have to speak louder. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's all this noise going on. People are talking and dishes and all the stuff. Like you can't just talk in your normal like house voice. She can't hear you, or he can't hear you. And so he spoke up. And so I was like, he did that because we've just taught him like speak and
Yeah.
then speak loudly so that they can hear you. And then my dad was just like, oh yeah, 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 that's what I want to say.
And you've given him practice, right? Practice and encouragement of and or feedback, like, so like the first time he probably ordered, he probably was really shy, and then you continue to coach that advice of, hey, you know what, you did well ordering, now the next step is you got to speak a little bit louder. And I think that that's the other part, is being able to give and receive the feedback has to happen as well, which is why the lunchroom is a great place to practice. And we need to make sure that that's happening in the classroom so that teachers can be giving feedback and or setting things up so that they can be reflecting on what worked well as we were working in groups, what worked well during this whole group discussion, what was challenging about during this debate or this other activity.
Yeah, that the other thing too. and I'm sure you've seen this, whether it was in your teaching experience or the work you do in the schools now. But when I was in school, now, I mean, I got pretty good grades, so I didn't usually have an issue with teachers or grades and whatnot. But kids now, but if I did, like, I would have gone to the teacher. Like, I never would have gone to my parents. Like, it wouldn't even have occurred to me to tell my mom. My parents were divorced. It didn't matter. I wouldn't have gone to either one of them and be like, "Hey, I got a B on this test or a C on this test or this paper. Like, do something about it." Like, that wouldn't literally just wasn't
Yeah.
an option. Like, I would have, I was either do nothing or I would have gone to the teacher and be like, "Hey," but it's shifted. And so what my wife has seen is a lot of times these kids, the first step is they go to their parents and their parents email and be like, "Hey, so and so, they didn't like their grade or they thought they should have better, whatever." And so it starts this whole dialogue then with the parent, and the kid's totally out of it. And so she's always like telling her students, like, if you have an issue with something in class, grade, paper, assignment, whatever, like, come to me first and we can talk about it, because you need to
Hmm.
learn to advocate for yourself and basically just like like take a position. Like, I have this
Yes.
opinion, like, I don't agree with this or I don't understand this or whatever, and you have to then say what it is. If you just tell your mom or your dad and they email me, you're taking you're taking the hard part out, and now they're doing it for you. And at some point, that's not going to be an option. Like, you're going to be an adult
Hmm.
at a job. You can't Your mom can't email your boss and be like, "Johnny doesn't understand this assignment." Like, and if you've
Yes.
never practiced it, you're going to be 25, 27 years old and you've never done it. And so
Yeah.
it's like, you have to do this. And so that's just fascinating to me, because it just, I literally just wouldn't have occurred to me to be like, to go to my mom and be like, "I need you to like talk to the teacher." Like, that was just simply a 0 out of 100 chance that that would have happened.
I think I would have, I think I probably did go to my parents, and I think my parents were like, you can practice with us. And that was the best that they would give, is they would be like, we're not having this conversation, but if you want to practice before you go, especially because my mom was a teacher. So I think she would be like, I'll gladly pretend to be your teacher and you can have this conversation with me. That is one of the skills that actually, in a couple of middle schools that we worked in last year, we gave teachers a lesson plan. We helped them build lesson plans around skills like that, both entering high school and even entering middle school, of how do you send your teacher an email? And we did everything from being like, you can't start an email with bro. Like, you can't actually start an email like that. And so, but then during an advisory block, having them practice sending their advisory leader an email as a practice one. And then that way it helped them to become more comfortable with being able to reach out to their teachers directly. And everything from, what was this assignment? Or, like, I missed yesterday. How do I catch up on this? Or, like, I bombed this test, whatever it is. But having that and even starting it as just an email instead of a conversation, but like you said, having the kids take the initiative and assert themselves and be like, here's what I need, and sending it directly to the teacher. But that's something that we actually have given and helped teachers to create. Like, what is it that you want in your email? And then how do you teach your kids, this is how you send an email to me? But that's a skill that needs to be taught and practiced.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think we take it for granted because we've sent so many emails, and you just know how to do it. And I remember he's my oldest is a junior now. He just turned 17, but it was a couple years ago, and probably he would still struggle now. But a couple years ago, like, he had no idea how to format an email. Like, he didn't know it. I remember hearing my wife like walk him through like each step. Like, you have to have a greeting, comma, space. You have a body of the email where you're stating whatever it is, space, and you have to sign
Yes.
off like with your name. Like, you don't, I mean, yeah, bro, or like, hey, like, you can't just start with whatever you want. Like, and even the subject of the email, like, first of all, don't leave it blank so it says no subject, but like, give some idea or clue as to what this is about, not just like, hi, like,
Knock,
assignment.
knock.
Right. Yeah. Like, assignment, your last name,
Yeah.
whatever, like something, so they see it and they're like, "Oh, I have some idea what it's about." And then this, but yeah, as she was doing it, I was like, "Oh, like, I don't know how I learned that, but I've sent so many emails in my life. I just take, I don't even think about it. Like, you open
Yeah.
up an email and you literally
Yes.
just follow the format. So it's, it's good. And I think probably the younger you could have the teacher start teaching the kids, the better, because that's just something they're going to, I mean, they're going to do that forever, probably.
Absolutely. Hmm.
What are you seeing? Obviously, teacher burnout, public educator especially burnout is a big topic. I know that's a lot of what you guys deal with and address at schools. I certainly hear it, from my wife and coworkers and teachers that have left, and like the demands, the pay seems to be flatlining, or very little raise, or sometimes no raises because of school budgets tightening. They used to be you got paid for like years of experience, and if you went back to school and you got like your master's, that would elevate pay. I think a lot of that seems to have gone away, so it's like this almost flat line of what you can make.
Hmm.
Like what are you seeing, and like how are you guys trying to help that, because that seems to be a real problem with attracting teachers but then getting them to stay once they get in.
Yeah, so I feel like everything that you just talked about is on point and is true. I think it depends state to state, district to district. There are still some districts that every district has now put on a cap. So even if you have a PhD plus 35 years of experience, you hit a wall at some point and they're like, you're at the top of the scale. So they might still have some level of scale. I think that the biggest thing that what we've seen is that right now, working with schools all over the country, the one thing that even in the last or that's different from the last 5 years, is the amount of uncertainty that all educators are navigating. So it's everything from, are we going to get a pay raise? Is our health insurance going to be paid for this year? Are we going to have to pay more there? What is AI going to look like? What are new safety protocols? Like the list just goes on and on and on. Everything from federal education responsibilities continuing to shift towards states means that districts are trying to interpret what that change and guidance and plan their school year. Schools are experiencing delays and changes due to grant funding. There's a couple of districts near me that they can't open up the middle or high school for the start of the school year because they are short like 35 staff members, and they
Oh wow.
can't get staff. They can't get people. And so they literally are just like, basically, like, if you can pass a criminal background and you have a beating heart and you are willing, you can come in and get a job. And what does that send for a message of people who, like teaching, like what a great profession to go into. So I feel like so many districts are being asked to do so much more with fewer predictable resources. The expectations certainly haven't gone down. Accountability hasn't gone down at all. Parents haven't become less demanding at all. And so the pressure has increased while the certainty has decreased. And I think that looks so different across the country, but I feel like that's one of the big things that we can all agree upon, is that there has really been this rise in uncertainty in education. And like you said as well, the pipeline is also drying up. So there's not as many people who want to go into teaching, which means that there's not as many coming out to become teachers, which then puts districts into a hard spot because, like, I might not be able to hire someone who's brand new out of college where the pay would be a lot less. But I do have someone who's willing to come in, but they've got 25 years of experience and a master's plus 60 credits beyond that. So they're at the very top of the pay scale, but that's almost like 3 new teachers' salaries. And so it becomes this,
Yeah.
there's just a lot of uncertainty. And I feel like all educators are navigating that at this point. And I think that's like the number one consistent thing, is that there's more uncertainty across the board.
Yeah, no, those are a lot of good points. I think it seems like what you're talking about with the, like, are you over 18? Can you pass a background check? You're hired. Like, it's like an adult babysitter, right? You have kids in a classroom. And so you're just putting an adult in there. And in that case, right, they have no teaching background. They have no teaching experience, but at least we can like put 25 or 30 kids in there and we'll assume that they're somewhat safe. And maybe they'll learn something and maybe they won't. And it's frustrating for like my wife, because well, I mean, she wanted to be a teacher from the time she was like 9 or 10 years old. Like she just knew that's what she wanted to do. And like every step, like as she got older, like it all was geared towards teaching. And then when she went to school and then student teaching, like just, she had this like I'm jealous of it because I never had it. I don't even have it
Hmm.
today. Um, she just knew, like,
Yeah.
just this is it. And
Yes.
now this is year 26, and I've tried to get her to even consider something else. She won't. She'll do it until she retires. She loves it, even with everything you just described, which is true here for sure. But she still loves the kids. She loves the relationships,
Hmm.
and there's enough kids that come to her at the end of a semester or a school year, or even a couple years after they've had her and they're graduating, and they come back and say like what a difference she made and how much they enjoyed her class or she pushed them or whatever. And you get even just a few of those messages, that's enough, right? That's enough to
Yeah.
offset like all the stuff. And so that's kind of what she gets a lot of energy still from that, not just the messages but the kids in general. um but I think she and people like yourself, it's like fewer and farther between as time keeps going and all these things are adding up. I think there's going to be less and less, kids growing up to be like, I want to be a public public high school educator. So then, like, what does it look like in 10, 15, 20 years? And obviously AI and like all this stuff. So I don't know. I don't know what the, I don't know what the future looks like. It seems grim. Hopefully it's not as grim as it seems. What,
I don't think it is.
yeah, you think there'll be, so like, so what are they going to do? So you have that school with like 30, 40 shortages. So what do they do? They just keep recruiting off the street until they fill the spots?
Yeah, so I think that it's a really complex problem, and I think one of the key pieces that your story about your wife just highlighted is that there's a lot that's really motivating about having someone, whether it's a child or an adult, come to you and be like, that conversation, that lesson you taught me, that whatever changed my life, made me want to do this. It was something that I remembered 5 years later. Like, that's a really powerful human desire to fulfill. And so I think what happens with a lot of places like that, like the school that has 30 plus vacancies, is that they get people who are done with one career and they're like, you know what, I can be a teacher. And so that's where the credentialing, like, oh, I've worked in corporate America for 25 years. Now I can become a teacher. And this is not at all to say that those people are not good at it. I do think that there is a stark contrast between somebody who has really learned philosophy of education and has really gone through all of that versus somebody who's spent a number of years in corporate America and then is like, I was a kid, I know how, or I had kids who went through school, therefore I can be a teacher. So that's a different conversation, I think. But I think that that's the way that a lot of schools do fulfill. And then they then start being like, okay, if you like this, how do we get you to get the credentialing so that we can keep you on? I think that the other part, though, is that yes, again, like I kind of feel like, again, like the pendulum's going to swing. And I feel like as stories are told and as we really get back into the relationship building, like instead of it just being on technology, I think that AI, depending on how it's brought in, like if it's just brought in as random tools, that's one thing. If it's brought in as a system and it's like, here's what this can do, that's going to change the face of education because while AI might make it so that teachers are no longer content experts, they can be the experts, just like what we were talking about at the start with the cell phone bans of how do I help students engage with each other? How do I help them learn how to have a conversation that's different from the conversation you're having with AI? How do I help them to read something and then talk to somebody else and be like, does this make sense to you? Is this like, do you think that this is actually true? Or do you think that I should look this up somewhere else? All of that, I think that that becomes more of where I could see schools and teachers still being absolutely essential for helping individuals, students become contributing community members instead of us all just being locked in to devices and just being like, I don't need to talk to you to have a podcast. I can just record something on my with chat GPT and produce it, like have it be my host. And I think that that's where we can really get into thinking around what are the skills that are needed, everything from executive functioning skills like time management, goal setting, interacting with one another, to more of the social emotional or academic skills of how do we respectfully disagree with one another, how do we have a conversation, how do we work through those awkward pauses, all of that. And I think that that's where I can really see hope for teaching and being like, that's where those are going to be the skills that AI can tell you, oh, here's how to network or here's how to do this. But until you actually get the practice,
Yeah,
it's really hard to read it and then be like, oh, okay, I can walk into a huge networking event and make 18 connections in 10 minutes.
that sounds terrifying. I think the critical thinking part that you talked about there about questioning, because you can't, because we've no shortage of access to information now between Google, YouTube, and all the AI platforms. Right, you can find out anything in seconds. So it's not that, but it's not always true. It could be false, like it might not be correct. And so I think it's really starting to look at that critically or double checking it, or yeah, like that, I don't know, that doesn't sound right or that doesn't look right. I've had several times. I use Claude now. I used to use GPT, but in whatever we're talking about, and I'll just be like, that's just not true. Like what you're saying is
Mhm.
not true, and they're like, yeah, actually, it isn't. And it's like, so it was like a test. Like, were
Thanks
you
for
just,
owning up to that.
yeah, were you just seeing if I was paying attention? But it's like, but what
Yeah.
you're like, because it'll contradict itself or whatever, which
Hmm.
I always think is really interesting. And it's like how many people are just not even paying attention; they're just asleep at the wheel and they're just take it whatever. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I'm happy. My oldest son, the junior, he's taking, I don't know if it's this semester or next, but he's taking a personal finance class, which I think is
Mm.
really important. And they certainly didn't have that when I was in school. That was forever ago. But I've always thought, and I even remember when I was in school thinking like the curriculum is fine, but I always felt like, and I didn't know this until I got out, but once I got into the real world, I felt like there was a lot of things that I had never really, like how to buy a house, buying a car, or leasing a car versus purchasing a car, what mortgage rates. I ended up buying one of the first things I bought a 3-2-1 mortgage. Like I'd never heard of that. But like understanding what that is, adjustable rate, all this kind of stuff that you need to kind of know. And I thought that would have been good. It doesn't have to be all 4 years, but like maybe your junior or senior year, like throw that into investing.
Yes.
Like when I got my first job, like a 401k, like I didn't really know what to do. I didn't really know what a mutual fund was. And like you have all these investment options. I don't know. My boss ended up, kind of walking me through it. He was kind of in his mid 40s, but I don't know. Like I felt like, I took algebra 3 and trig and geometry and calculus, which was great. But then I got these life situations like 4 5 years later. And I was like, I've never actually seen this before. I don't know. So it was like, I think we could have done a better job of maybe not taking so much advanced math, which I've never used in my life, and
Hmm.
maybe replacing that with like, hey, this is how the stock market works. Like this is how a 401k works. Like this is how
Hmm.
a checking account, a savings account, and like just all this kind of stuff that you eventually need. And I know your parents can help and stuff, but I don't know. I feel like it would be better. So I was happy that he's taking that. There's something else that he was taking, more of like a life skills type
Yeah.
of class, which
Hmm.
I think is good. I'm happy that they have that, because again, like yes, you have resources, but it's good for you to be exposed and to walk through these situations so that when you do have them, you're like, it's not the first time that you're looking at Fidelity or Vanguard or whatever and be like, I don't have any idea what to do with this 10% or 15% that I'm coming out of my paycheck. So
Exactly.
I'm happy. I hope more schools are doing that because it's just important. It's just important to know.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot more of the middle and high schools that are looking at what are some basic life skills. And even thinking back to, like you were saying, like I got a pass out of some of the extracurriculars at in my high school because of the track that I was on. And so I was taking algebra, and so I never took home ec or anything like
Mm,
that. And so even like knowing basic cooking, like I was very fortunate because I had a whole family that loved to cook, so I learned how to do that. But even still, like there are legit classes now for in college and even for young adults that are really basic life skills like cooking, like really simple repairs, not even thinking of auto mechanics, but it's more so of things like how do you replace your windshield wiper fluid, things like that. And it's like those classes, maybe we do need to bring back a little bit more and say, yeah, this is a lot of what life is going to be figuring out, even is this within my wheelhouse? Can I figure how to fix this? Or is
yeah.
this something I need to call someone and get an expert on? Because we don't want it to go in the extreme other um, range as well of being like, I can fix anything. I took one auto mechanic class, like, let me do this for you type thing. So
Yeah, for sure.
I think that it is, I think that that is a huge piece. And I also think that really goes, I think that it's a great mirror as well for what we're trying to do with teachers with well-being and self-care, because in so many schools, teachers have been told just pour into the kids, like make sure your kids pass testing, make sure you're giving them your all, doing all of this. And the number one thing that I hear from so many teachers is that they're like, I drove home and I just sat in my driveway for a half hour because I couldn't get out of my car and make myself go into the house because I was just so drained and I wasn't ready to give everything that I had left, which was nothing, but somehow trying to find 100% more to give to my family. And so they'll say, like I pulled into the garage and I turned off my car and I just sat there for 20 minutes until one of my kids came out and got me. And I feel like that's like one of the big things that we're trying to tackle is we know educators today are expected to be not only instructors, but counselors, behavior specialists, technology experts, curriculum designers, family communicators, data analysts, the list goes on, crisis managers. And that's often even just before lunch. And I feel like what we're trying to do now is we're trying to say, instead of just putting things on teachers and being like, you need to learn this skill or you need to do this, it's more so of looking and being like, what does self-care for a 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old individual who's in teaching, what does that actually look like for you? And the spoiler alert is that it's not, like a pizza party or, like, oh, there's a masseuse in the staff room who will be there for 3 hours today and you can go down and get a 10-minute massage, like there's one of them for 300 staff members, but instead of having it be something that's more realistic of how do we train our minds and how do we really put some boundaries on that are not, because we need to make sure it's, again, not an extreme of being like, oh, I just don't need to care. Like I've seen that in some schools too, where the administrators will be saying, like, I have a group of teachers and they are literally like, nope, contract says I start at 7:30 a.m. and I'm done at 2:30, and like that's all they'll do. And I get a 30-minute prep period. And they're like, and they're struggling because they're not putting in any extra time. And so it becomes this, how do we create this balance where it's not, you need to be giving all of your time to this, but also you're not saying, I can never go above and beyond and do anything beyond what my contract hours are. I think that that's the other key piece for teachers that we have to see. And I feel like, again, it's like multi-layered, but I feel like they all kind of mirror each other. Like the students need the life skills. And I think that the teachers need different life skills of like, they know how to do the cooking. They know how to, like at this point, they might know how to do their finances, but now it becomes more of like, how do you take care of yourself? And so I feel like it still is this mirror image or this multi-layer that we're tackling there.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big one. When I was in school, and I think even now, if you haven't taught or you don't know someone fairly closely who teaches, I think you grossly underestimate the time it takes. I thought teachers just rolled in kind of right before school started and they rolled out when school was over, and that was it. And it was summers off and it was great. And then I married into it. And, my wife is consistently throughout all these years, she's up at 5:30 or 6. Some days she's leaving the house at 6:30, at the latest, probably 7:30. She never gets home before 5. A lot of times it's 5:30 or 6. And yeah, when she gets home, she's totally spent. It's mentally draining. It's physically draining. And then you have typically once the school year really kicks in, then your hours of grading. Now I know she's an English teacher, which requires more manual grading than some subjects, but still there's grading, then there's lesson planning, and then like you said, prepping, and then all the other things. And so it's like, where do you carve out time? So it's like, do I get up early? Well, I'm already getting up at between 5:30 and 6. That means I have to get up at 4:30 or 5. Like that's a big ask for people. And especially if you have young kids or whatever, then that's another layer. And then when you get home, you're like, well, I'm not going to work out. I'm not going to do anything then. It's between 4:30 and 6:30, and I'm totally spent. So yeah. And then the week goes by and now you're at the weekend. Well, you don't feel like doing it on the weekend because you're drained from 5 consecutive days of doing it. The weekend is just to recover, and then you're right back into it. And it's a vicious cycle. And my wife and I have had this conversation so many times about, I call it life fitness. Like getting in better shape so that you can handle the strain and the drain of this 180 school days and 200 and whatever it is, 220 or 40 days of the year, and 180 of them you're on at this level. Like the better shape that you're in, cardio, strength training, whatever it is that you do for to move your body to so that you're just in better shape to absorb it all. Because that's what, when you're not working out, like you're just absorbing all of this, and at some point, right, it just breaks down, whether it's an injury or you get sick or whatever. But it's always like, where do I find, like once the school year starts, like where do I find the time, the energy to do it? Because I'm already putting in so much time and effort. So I
Yes.
totally feel you with people getting home and just sitting. Feel like I don't want anybody to touch me. I don't want anybody to talk to me. I just want to be alone, like quiet,
Yes.
dark.
Yes. And then there's also the whole mental load of, for your wife, for example, the number of students that she has. Let's say that she's just graded some papers that have come in, and a student who usually does really well on a paper bombs a paper. And now all of a sudden, as she's trying to decompress for the evening, she's now questioning everything, like what's going on with that student? Has something changed? Did I not teach the lesson well enough? Did this happen? Did that? And now there's this whole mental gymnastics part that's going on there. And that's just one student. And then on the other extreme, like she has this other kid who came in and confided that here's this challenge at home, or here's this thing, or here's this dream that I have. And now she's carrying that mental load too. And so there's all of that part that's happening simultaneously. And I agree with you. And I think that there definitely are a number of people who are like us, where it's like healthy body, healthy mind, like you have to keep both of those things going. And what I always try to say is like, my version of healthy body is not going to be the same as your version of healthy body, and is not going to be the next person. So like, yes, for me, like I have to go for a run. Like I know that. So I just know I need to run, but other people don't. And maybe they need, like maybe they do need to sit and stare at a wall for 10 minutes. And maybe that's what helps them to actually condition their body, because maybe that's what, like maybe the staring at the wall allows their nervous system to reset and relax and lets their brain to process information. So I think it really is an individualized piece. Otherwise I'd just be like, everyone should come out for a run with me. But I know that it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, I'm the same way, because I have to run or move in some way that gets my heart rate up and and breaks a sweat. Like it's just hard coded into the matrix. I can't not do it. But I
Does it have
understand
to
that.
be like a certain level of physical exertion for you? Like for me, like if I just go for a walk, I'm like, nope. Like, like I could walk
No,
for 3 hours if it's
yeah,
flat, and I'm like,
mm,
nope, that doesn't
no,
like my
yeah,
mind and everything is still going. Like I have to like
yeah. There
not
has to
quite
be
punish myself, but I have to like put myself through some strain in order to have a release.
yeah. It doesn't. Yeah, I've started to jump rope, which I hadn't done since I was a
Mm,
kid, but I've been seeing a lot on Instagram. Like if you're pressed for time, even just like
yes.
a 2 to 5 minute jump rope session gets the heart rate up, out of breath, probably break a sweat, um, but you don't have to prep as much, and you do it, and it's good for the body, like just moving up and down. And so I had a jump rope that I think I bought it for my son. He never used it, so it's decent quality and relatively new. So I've been doing that when I'm short on time, but it has to be enough. Like I have to be out of breath, and I pretty much have to break a sweat. So it doesn't have to be like an all out sprint, or doesn't have to be
Yeah.
a 10-mile run. It doesn't have to be anything like that, but usually a few miles, 25 to 30 minutes,
Hmm.
that I just feel like I've done something. But yeah, because we'll walk the dog and that's fine, but I don't get anything out of that. I don't even really consider that like exercise. I know that it counts.
Hmm.
Cutting the grass, kind of, it takes me about an hour to push
Do you
mow
use
our
a
yard.
push mower, or do
Yeah,
you? Yeah.
it's an old school. I won't use an electric mower unless they stop making gas ones.
Okay.
Because it sounds like a vacuum cleaner, and I don't want to vacuum my yard.
Okay.
And I mean, I started cutting the grass when I was like 11 or 12, and my first real job, or not real job, my first paying job was like with a landscape company. So I kind of grew up around it, and I'm good at it, and I just like the sound of a mower and starting a mower and hearing it run. And so I, when I see people in my neighborhood using those like E60s or whatever, and it just sounds like a vacuum, and I'm like, I
Hmm.
want to hear the mower, like I want to hear the sound. So yeah, but if it's warm enough, obviously I'll sweat, but I'm not really out of breath, so it's a little better. But even then, I don't really like count that. Um, yeah, I have to move. It just
Yeah.
has to be more. But like you said, I mean, not everybody runs. Some people can't, whether it's physical ailment or previous injury or whatever. But these, as well as my wife, I mean, there's so many now. It's not 1970 anymore. You're not like Jane Fonda or Richard Simmons, or you have no other option. Like there's just so many different types of classes, and some really easy on the body and the joints, some harder. There's bar and there's Orange Theory and 360 and like gyms everywhere and kettlebells. That wasn't a thing when I was, growing up. And those are,
Yeah.
we have a bunch of those here, and all the different ways you can use those. Like there's just so many options now. Like you just kind of have to, there's no real excuse anymore to be like, well, there's just nothing for me. It's like, well, there's got to be something. So
Yes.
you have to find it.
Hmm.
You kind of have to force it, but I get it. Like it's a tough battle. That's an interesting point you made about the almost like the sociology, the social worker aspect of teaching. That's another thing I grossly underestimated. My wife's a true empath, and she a lot of times has these stories of these kids that have confided in sometimes like really awful home situations, or something happened to one of their friends, or whatever, and then that just, it's hard for her to say no and not like be that confiding, that person that they can trust and
Yeah.
share that with, which is great. But on the other hand, like it just adds to the plate. And so it's already full and overflowing. And then you're adding that. And like you said, like the mental gymnastics. And now you're like trying to process that, and you're trying to like help them. And then you're thinking about that. You can't just like turn, some of those stories, or you just turn that off. And then, that goes on for weeks or months at a time. And then like it just continues to add to the totality of everything you're trying to deal with, which I just didn't. It's just not something you, until you experience it was through someone else. Like I don't think you realize that how prevalent that
Yeah.
is.
And I think that to me really speaks to the whole point of like, one of the shifts we need to make is that well-being is not a reward for finishing everything. Like it's not, like, oh, once I've graded all these papers, or once I've made it through the first semester, then I can go and get a massage, or I can go and do this. Educators are often taught both directly and indirectly that they can rest, they can exercise, they can connect with others, or enjoy life once work is done, once they're caught up, once everything is corrected, once their kids are in a good spot. But the work is never done. And so I think that's really where well-being has to become part of the plan rather than the prize at the end of whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And I
Yeah,
think
that's
that can really help out with the mental load of, if we start prioritizing and saying, yes, I heard all of this. And I know for me, like for my business partner, the number one way that she relaxes is by sewing and doing creative hobbies, which to me just would stress me out. That would not be relaxing at all. But that's her equivalent of going for a run, is she's just like, oh, if I can sit down and knock out something creative, work on a quilt, do something like that, like that's what really helps her. And I think that's where we have to get into the, find whatever it is, find whatever gives you that release and that gives you that rest and that rejuvenation, and then preserve it at all costs, whatever it looks like for you.
Yeah, 100%. It doesn't necessarily have to be the physical exertion exercise. Yeah, it could be music, it could be writing, um, whatever. It doesn't matter. But yeah, you have to do it, and it also has to be kind of something you enjoy. Like obviously, if you're forcing it, you won't stick with it. Like you'll eventually, like if you're not a runner and you try to run, you'll eventually just stop running because you're like, this is dumb.
Sure. Hmm.
And same like yourself with the sewing. Like if that's not something you're interested in and you try it, like you just won't stick with it because it just
Hmm.
won't. So take some experimentation, but then find what works, and then you can adapt and do that. So talk a little bit about your company, your business partner, like the business that you started, and then like kind of how you help schools and what that looks like, because it's really fascinating.
Yeah, so we're Positive School Solutions, and our goal is really thinking around, we know that we don't need educators to care less about their students. We don't need them to stop. What we need them to do is to stop disappearing from their own lives in order to care for everyone else. And so what we do is we work with schools first, really thinking around, how do we establish a really strong adult culture? A lot of that comes through well-being, and again, practices that are all around, how do we shift our mindset? How do we figure out what are our non-negotiables of 5 minutes? How do we build in really small moments of joy? Is one of our practices of saying, how can we build in at lunchtime 30 seconds of joy for you as a teacher so that you can really rejuvenate yourself? And then once we've gotten the well-being, then we can really start looking at and saying, so what skills can we build? What skills do students need at this particular school that will really help them to thrive? And our whole goal is both adult and student success of how do we really create a stronger school? And the number one way that we found that is from top down, from the leaders down to any staff person, is that whole educators are what create stronger schools. And that's where we see more student success. And so this year, we're really trying to build a nationwide community around the central belief of whole educators create stronger schools. And so we're starting with really helping founding groups of educators who want to help make the shift, and the way that we talk about educator well-being, and helping educators to build lives that feel healthy, meaningful, and sustainable, because we know that when educators feel that way, then we know that student success really raises. And that's what we want to see, is how do we create schools where students are thriving because staff is thriving. And I think that that's like, they go hand in hand. And you know, teachers who feel safe, seen, and respected are more likely to be more innovative, are more likely to bring up ideas of, here are patterns that I'm seeing. And that's all that we are working on, is how do we create systems so that in schools, so that both adults and students really thrive.
I think that's great. Do you guys typically work with like the entire school, or do you do certain departments, or does it kind of just depend on what they're looking to do? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, so it does really depend on what the schools want. And what we will say is we work with everyone. So I had the good fortune of being out in Ohio a couple of weeks ago, and I was working with the front office staff and really just helping them to unify as a team, because they're the front line, you know. And so they were talking around immigration issues that they had experienced this year and how that was really stressful, and really thinking around what was coming up this year. And so we were really building, like, how do we unify this team together? And then that infiltrates the rest of the school, of if you have that really strong start there. In other schools, in another school that we're working in right now, we're really focusing in on how do we help students understand what expectations are, and how do we help the staff all become really clear on, here is the entire school's philosophy and what are going to be the expectations around behavior, because there was a lot of variation. And then how do we grow that? So for us, we really do believe, you know, like, you can't ignore your special area teachers or your integrated art teachers and only focus in on your classroom teachers. You can't only focus in on educators and not focusing on leaders. Like, it has to be a whole school effort in order to really make culture change and to really see substantial impact. It has to be everyone from the bus drivers to the cafeteria workers to the principal to the deans to the teachers and everyone in between. It really needs to be an all on board effort. And so that's where we really focus a lot of our effort, is how do we work with an entire school and give everyone what they need? Because what we know is integrated arts teachers who see lots of different students have different needs for what skills they need, and how to structure their classes and make them really effective than what a classroom teacher might need. And so it really, we work with everyone trying to meet their needs and help them out.
Yeah, hearing you kind of describe that, you don't realize how many different, like when you start talking like bus drivers and the cafeteria staff and custodians, like it's so much more than just, principal, teacher, student. Do you how so if a school was interested in bringing you guys in, do you do an assessment? They outline kind of what they're looking for, and then do you go on site and kind of observe, or do you how do you decide, or how do they decide, and then you guys decide together like what you're going to do? Like, how do you, I guess, assess their needs?
Yeah, great question. And so a lot of times what happens is a leader will call us and they'll say, I'm having this problem. And they lay out the problem, and then we share, here are some different ways that we can go around helping you solve this problem. in a number of cases, what ends up happening is we end up going out to the school and we do what we call a culture assessment day. So we're going into lots of different classrooms and lots of different spaces. So we hit the front office, we hit the cafeteria when students are in there. And then what we're able to do is this is like a calibrated tool. And so we're able to look at it and say, here are all your areas of strengths, and here are a couple of areas that you can work on to develop. And then we go back to the problem and we'll say, okay, so your main problem was like this one school that I was sharing, like this, they were saying, like our students, like they don't feel like there's any consequences. There's, like they leave the classroom because of disruptive behavior. They come back and they're like, nothing happened. And then as we got in there, I was able to point out and be like, okay, here are a couple of really good strengths. The teachers were really good at building relationships. You could tell that they cared about their students. This was a middle school. You could tell that they really had taught students routines. And because the students knew them really well. But then as they were teaching, I was like, there are two huge pieces here. I was like, one, all of the teachers are being so permissive. So every time a kid calls out, they don't do anything. And then what ends up happening is the teacher is keeping track of all of this while they're teaching. And there comes a point where they're just like, David, get out of here, and they're just like at their limit. But usually what ends up happening is David is like, what the heck? Like, why did you just lose your mind on me? Because they don't see that connection. And so and then the other part that I worked on with them is I noticed, I was like, listen, like your kids are being expected to move from one class to the next class and sit there for 40 minutes and not have time to talk and not have time to do anything and sit and do worksheets. And I was like, you're going to have behavior problems there. And so then we take all of that information and we start saying, okay, so let's look at what would be the biggest bang for our buck. Where can we start? Let's do that first, and then we can build on the other one. So for this one, we really got clear on what does a student success system look like in our school? And it's something that, like, I don't come in and I'm not like, here are the pieces that you need to have. A lot of times I have those in my mind, but it's not something that I'm going to force upon people. I really try to get them to be like, who do you want your kids to be? Let's start working from there. And then as a team, we develop it together. So usually that's like a smaller group that's a representative of the staff. And so we'll do something like that. So there's a lot of different ways that it can start. Most of the times it starts with, hey, this is a problem that we need help solving. And then from there, and that problem can be our students aren't behaving, or we're seeing a spike in our misbehaviors and office referrals. It could be our teacher morale is just really low. And, like we've tried everything from pizza parties to smoothie bars to everything else, and that's not working. Or it could be, like we had a huge turnover this year and now we have 15 new staff members, and that's 30% of our staff. And we need help with getting them up to understanding what our philosophy is. And so there's a lot of different problems that come our way that we then look at and we're like, okay, here's how we can help out with this.
No, I love that. What do you have? I'm assuming you have like a before and after, like case studies of kind of this is what was going on. We came in, we implemented XYZ over whatever the duration is, and then they take that and then come back, whether it's school year or next year or whatever. Do you have like kind of before and after, like wins of like just real differences that you're making?
Yes. And we have different data that points it out, like in one school, in an elementary school, over the course of a year, student and parent and staff feedback went from, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was like whatever the percent was of students who felt like they didn't have anyone to talk to. And it increased by like 60% over the course of a year after working with us, of like just feeling like they had people that they could talk to at the school, and feeling like they had friends at the school, and feeling like that they had the strategies to connect with others. And that was a huge win to see that, of making it be more than a place of just being like, oh, academic scores went up, but instead being like, oh, we're really functioning as a community and we're really doing well there. Other ones, like look as other case studies are more around, staff was calling out, like we had this many absences, and then afterwards of really focusing in on well-being, we've seen a significant decrease in the number of staff that are calling out. And it's not because leaders were saying, like you can't call out
Yeah,
anymore. It
yeah.
was more so of they had the tools and the strategies to feel like, okay, I have better resilience now. And so, yeah, we definitely have things like that all over our website that can be found there.
Nice. Um, so we'll wrap up here with the running. So you said before we got started this November, so in a few months, it'll be 10 consecutive years of running at least 2 miles every day, which I can't even say that out loud without laughing because I just can't comprehend it. Um, like how did I assume you didn't start with that like intention. It just kind of built, and all of a sudden you were like, "Oh, I have this many days in a row. I'll keep it going." Um, I still don't know how you've done it again between injury, illness, and the weather, because you don't live in Bermuda.
Yeah.
Um, just talk about that. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So I think that what makes the work that I do so powerful, especially around well-being, is that it's all stuff that I've lived through. So I was in a different job. I was working in the nonprofit sector, and it was it was really, everything felt like a crisis all the time. My phone was ringing at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there came points where I was just like, why? Like this isn't actually a crisis. But what I needed to do was I needed to start figuring out and putting some boundaries and figuring out, like, how do I help myself so that I can be more resilient and I can have these strategies. And so I set out a goal. I had been traveling nonstop. I remember I had just gotten on November 5th, or maybe I think it was on November 6th. I had just gotten back from like a 5-day conference over in Italy where I had definitely eaten as much Italian food as I could. And I was like, I need to really get into a regular routine. And so up to that point, I've always been a runner. I had run a couple of marathons. I had trained for a bunch of half marathons, but I would kind of ebb and flow, like I would run a marathon and then I would hang up my shoes for 7 months and be like, I'm never doing that again. Like I'm not running anymore. And so I decided I really wanted to instead commit to showing up for myself every day. And so I said, I'm going to do 100 days of running. No, no excuses. I can run on the treadmill. I can run outside, which is my preferred method, but I have to do at a minimum 2 miles. And so I started that. And out of those 100 days, I will tell you, David, that probably 40 of those days, I was like, why am I doing this? Like, like you said, like I can remember New Year's Day that first year, I was just like not feeling well at all. And I tried to run and then I couldn't run. And then I tried a couple hours later and I still couldn't run. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. And I was just like, nope, like you got to get these 2 miles in. And so during that 100 days, and I think that those 40 days that were challenging, I think most of them happened in the first 60 days. And then I hit a point where it just became second nature.
Part of your
And then what
routine.
I realized, yeah. And then what I realized was I started moving it instead of, I had just kind of been like, oh, I'll fit it in wherever. And then I started being like, no, I'm going to intentionally start at my mornings this way. And as I really started doing that, I started building this morning routine that allowed me to ease into my day instead of picking up my phone and seeing the onslaught of messages and crises or opening up my email. I specifically carved out time where I was just like, nope, this is just for me. Before the world really asks anything from me, I'm going to give myself something. And so it started. And when I hit the 100-day mark, I was like feeling pretty good. And I was just like, I wonder if I can go a second 100 days. And so I did that. And then I did that one more time. And then I was like, I've done 300 days. Like, can I do a year? At that point, you're only 65 days
Yeah.
away. And I was like,
Why
I think
not?
I can do a full year. And like, that would be pretty cool to be like, I ran for a full year. And
And you
honestly, I
just
don't
never
know how,
stopped.
yeah, I don't know how, like, I can remember that year, but I don't know how it just continued on. But I think that is like that to me is the part that I need in order to really center myself. And I think for me, it just shows of I'm the most important person to myself, even when I don't feel like it, even when I feel like I should be giving to everyone else. It's my reminder of that whole notion, which I know gets said so many times, but it's so true. It's that airline, the airplane idea of like, if you don't put your own oxygen mask on first, you can't help others. And so you have to feed into yourself. And I feel like that's what running every day has done for me. And there are still days, like, I don't want anyone out there to think that like I'm doing really amazing things, because there are days where I go out and I set and I'm like, I'm doing 2 miles and I'm running like 10 to 12-minute miles. Like I'm not pushing myself. This is a recovery run. And then there are other days where I am like, you know what? I'm going to do a 6 mile run and I'm going to see how fast I can do it. And I'm going to push myself because I feel good. So there's still a lot of leeway in there.
I love it. I could not do it. I've run off and on most of my adult life. I couldn't even do the 100 days. Like I would need off days. I do love to run. I don't love it that much. Uh, that's just fascinating. I'm not sure I could do anything 100 straight days. I had to think about that. But yeah,
Sure,
it's
you've
amazing.
brushed your teeth 100 days, I bet.
Well, that's probably true. That's a pretty low lift though.
But I think
Um,
that that's like the thing, is that like if you find like I love James Clear's Atomic Habits for that, of like what is the smallest amount, like for exercise, like you said, like even if it's not running, but like what is the smallest amount of exercise that I can commit to? And if it's 2 minutes of jump roping and it's like that's the absolute minimum. Maybe other days I am going out for a run. Maybe other days I am doing something else, but like at a minimum, I'm committing to this. And I think that that becomes more what what can change us, is when we commit to something like that, of like what's the smallest amount that I know I can do.
yeah, that's true. And I think once you establish a low baseline, then I think it probably just automatically it kind of increases even if you're not really trying. Um, I haven't done a race. I've not signed up for anything, but usually it's hard for me to get through a year without being like, I should probably do a race. So I was walking the dog this morning, and here we are on August 7th, and I was like, man, if I'm going to do a race, like I probably need to like figure it out because I'm running out of time, especially with good weather. And I
Hmm.
really want to do an ultra, but I don't know. I don't know if I can squeeze that in. It's going to be tough because I probably need to do it by like mid-November, which really only gives me like 3.5 months, which is probably not enough time. But that's like my next, because
You could
I've
do
done
an
the,
ultra elsewhere, like down in Arizona or
yeah,
something, and
obviously, yeah, I
then
could travel and I could push it to different parts, different time of the year. I
yeah.
couldn't run in Arizona because of the snakes. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I've done all the regular running races. I've done a bunch of triathlons. I did the obstacle course races. So now it's like, what's something I haven't done? I think the ultra. There's a woman I follow on Instagram. She just did 100 miler, and she had done a 50 miler before that. And then I just saw today she has her fall race schedule. She literally just did 100 miles like 2 weeks ago, and then there's like 5 more races for the year. I was like, this lady just must spend like her entire life running.
Hmm.
But it can be addicting, and you feel better. I feel better. Like every time I run, my head is clearer. I usually can think more clearly. I just feel better.
Yes.
So like we said, find whatever that is for you. It's critically important. This is great. This might be the fastest hour and 13 minutes I've ever had on the show. We could go for much longer, but we'll wrap it up here. Any final thoughts as the school year kicks off? And then a plug. How can people find you, whether it's you or your business, if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah, I think my final thing I would just say is that we've spent so many years trying to solve educator burnout by giving educators more strategies, better classroom tools, occasional reminders to practice self care. But what we've overlooked is something fundamental, which is that educators are human beings before they are professionals. And they need practical ways to build lives that support their energy, relationships, health, and sense of purpose, not simply strategies for surviving the next difficult week. Um, and to everyone who is, whether you just started school or you are heading back before the end of the month, or if you have that beautiful grace period where you are literally 1 month out until you are due back, I wish you a phenomenal year, and that I really hope that you do prioritize yourself and your well-being first and foremost. You can find us on our webpage, which is positiveschoolsolutions.com. We also are on all LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, so you can find us there. And my name is Sarah, so you can always just find me on our website there, and you can message me directly as well.
Awesome. Really appreciate the time and insight. As always, great to see you again. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.